and welcome to This Week in Metropolis. The transmission will begin shortly.
Yep, King P here.
And Steely07, and welcome to another episode of This Week in Metropolis. We have got a special guest with us today who hasn't been on before, so it's not Mark. It's a good friend of mine, Adam Wheeler. Hello, Adam.
Welcome.
Hi, thanks for introducing me as special guest. I feel very honoured. I mean, I would have just settled for guest. You know.
Well, me and Adam, Matt, go back 30, probably as long as I've lived. So
Yeah, pretty much.
Not giving my age away, but 34 years we've known each other.
Yeah.
And Adam is on today to not only talk about some of our favourite heroes and villains later in the show, but to kick us off, we're going to talk about Adam's own project, which is the Secret Protectors comic.
Yeah, I guess so. I'm like the worst salesperson for my own story. I don't know, it just doesn't come naturally. But yeah,
But clearly it is, because, with the success of your recent Kickstarter, fantastic.
Yeah.
So whatever you're doing right. If you want to tell us about that, so people might not know what the success is.
So for those who aren't aware, Kickstarter is a crowdfunding platform. You can basically, whatever your project may be, doesn't have to be a comic. It can be, a actual electronic good. It could be a film. People do all manner of different projects on Kickstarter. Some people might not have heard of Kickstarter, might have heard of like Indiegogo or GoFundMe, that sort of thing. So we set our goal at £2,000. That was the budget we needed to raise in order to essentially print the comic, because printing costs, unfortunately, are ridiculous. They're really, really high. So that was the main sort of cost of the comic, so to speak. But yeah, it's a joint work between me and Benjamin Nunn. He's the artist. He pretty much makes the whole thing into a comic. So I'll tell him what I think should be happening, who should be saying what, who should be in what panel, and Ben takes that away and does what he needs to do with it, basically.
The writing of it obviously is something that's been close to your heart for a long time, I think, because I've seen you talk about it before, and we've had discussions about it, that you've had this idea for, I don't know, what would you say, 10, 15 years?
Yeah, I mean, I've had it for a very, very long time. It's not... I probably couldn't just put my finger on it and say like that is the moment it sprang into life. I've told this story so many times, so hopefully I'm not going to bore anyone. But I don't know if you would remember City of Heroes. It was a bit like World of Warcraft, an MMO back in the day on PC. This was still during like dial-up era, so I struggled to play the game because the internet wasn't really good enough, but they had the most amazing character creator screen, and you could give them a backstory. You could choose their powers, and just over the years, I mean, I kind of fell out of love with the game just because literally my gameplay was so laggy. But I just loved, making the characters and thinking up these elaborate backstories. And over the years, it got to the point where I had just dozens and dozens of these characters. And when the game closed down back in like 2012, I, for whatever geeky reason I'll never know, I wrote a lot of these characters down to save them. And just with what's happened over the last few years, I mean, I don't know if you guys, I mean, obviously, you're doing your creative thing, you've got your podcast going on, and I don't know if it got to the point one day where you were just like, we have to do this. And that was very much the point I got to. It became sort of all encompassing. You couldn't really think about anything else. You were like, I have to see if I can get this done. And I managed to find Ben. Strangely enough, he literally lives about a 5-minute walk from where I just moved to, and we met up a few times, well, a lot of times, discussed it all, and he was happy to go in with me on the project, and here we are. Basically, you know, it's now, I mean, it's 2017 was when we met, so now it's, you know, about 3 and a bit years later, and we've finished our first volume. So that's issues 1 to 4.
It's fantastic.
Yeah.
One thing that I noticed, I was reading the first episode of it this morning. It's what it does, that amazes me is the wrong way to put it, but you know, you said you came from sort of creating these characters in a game, and that was like the conception of them. The writing of it is really mature, not mature in the sense of like content, but mature in it. It seems like you've done it for before or for a long while. And I think if you know you're sort of describing it almost as like your first venture into it, it's amazing. You know that you've gone from not doing it to doing it. I guess you had all. I guess it's one of those things. You had all those years of. Was it you had all those years of sort of subconsciously honing your craft as such, like creating these characters and the backstories and that, and you was doing something you didn't really realize you were becoming a writer. So. Do you get where I'm coming from?
Yeah, no, definitely. It was. It definitely went. It's gone through a lot of different sort of iterations in my mind. I think when I, like Kate, my wife, she sort of said to me, you know, back in 2017. She was like, well, you know, why don't you try and get it made? Because I just laid it out to her. I said, this is the story. This is what would happen. I kind of explained everything to her. And she says, it sounds really cool. Like, why don't you try and get it made? And it's, again, like, not being an artist, it wasn't really something that crossed my mind too much. But the first thing I did was actually sit down and type out everything. So the characters, their backstories, how they'll be interacting with each other for, like, you know, the foreseeable future. I mean, this is a... the first part of the story, what we're in now, I mean, I would like it to run for 10 issues, and that would be the culmination of the first story arc. But in my mind, I've got about 7 or so of those arcs.
Wow.
So
that's your life's work then, isn't it?
Yeah, pretty much. And yeah, I don't know. I don't really know why my brain works the way it does. I couldn't tell you, but I love storytelling. I love story in general. So, you know, it doesn't, you talk about sort of being mature. The idea was, I mean, I was like brand new to, you know, the indie comic scene. I hadn't even really read a lot of comics growing up, truth be told, because, you know, it was quite hard to get them where we were, like me and James. You know, our corner shop maybe stocked the odd 1 or 2. Yeah. I was always the sort of person who wanted to read a story from start to finish. I didn't really want to just like jump in halfway through. But yeah.
Do you think though that was a benefit from the point of view you were, if you hadn't read a great deal of comics before, there wasn't an expectation of what it should be like. You was only meeting your own expectation in your mind of what you wanted it to be.
Yeah, maybe. I don't know. It's such a hard one because, you know, I don't think I could probably give a complete answer when it comes to where all the story came from. I mean, I've got a lot of, you know, things that have influenced us, and obviously I don't want to go into too many spoilers either. So, you know, it makes it difficult to, you know, sort of say, you know, I've got this idea, and obviously Ben knows where it's all going, and, you know, I've told the wife as well, obviously, but I can't. It's very, very awkward when you're trying to tell someone about this idea you've got, because story-wise, you don't really want to give too much of it away. But yeah, I don't know. It's a tough one. It really is. I mean, I've always loved comic book characters, even if I wasn't able to read comics. I'm sure you guys remember like the old X-Men cartoon, the Batman series, Spider-Man, and I mean, what you were saying about it. The sort of maturity of writing. For us, the idea was that we didn't really, as I was about to say, the indie comic scene is quite full of, there's nothing wrong with this, but very gory or very over-the-top sexualized sort of comics. And, you know, I have no issue with any of that, but it's just not really what I would want to write. So the
They're
idea
trying
is
to push the extremes because they're
Yeah.
independent as such.
Yeah, we are kind of, you know, when I say we, I mean like me and Ben, we're a bit of like a freak anomaly in the comic book, like the indie comic book scene, because we are telling what is essentially a sort of, you know, superhero story, which is quite unheard of in as much as you wouldn't think it would be. But indie comics, they don't really tend to focus on superhero stories. Even if there are superheroes, it's, you know, extreme sort of versions. We wanted to kind of write something that would make people think, you know, put our characters in tough situations. But the idea is that at the same time, like, you could read it and sit there with your kids and kind of enjoy it. You're going to enjoy it on one level, and they're obviously going to enjoy it on another level. It wasn't really written with any sort of specific demographic in mind. We weren't like, oh, let's write for little kids, because at the end of the day, if you write for little kids, they're going to reject it immediately. As soon as they're old enough to realise that it's written for them, they don't want it. You know, I was that way. When I was a kid, I used to wanting to watch, you know, 18s and stuff. You know, so it was very much a case of just try and respect whoever the reader may be. And yeah, like, it's all about choice and consequence, you know.
Have you been surprised since because now it's released out into the world, and you was talking about not writing for a particular demographic. Clearly, it now has a demographic because you're meeting these goals and things like that. Were there any surprises when, you know, if you've met people and they said, "Oh, I really enjoyed it," or whatever it may be? Were there any surprises with who has adopted it, or any things where you thought, "Wow, that's really cool"? I'm really pleased you like it as such.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, our most recent Kickstarter, obviously, it finished on Friday just gone. We raised £2,464, I think it was in the end, which was just over, obviously over our £2,000 goal. And we had I think it was 107 backers in the end, which for us is like incredible. You know, we've been to quite a few Comic Cons now. We've been to like Portsmouth, MCM, London Film and Comic Con, and you know, it's very rare that over the course of obviously one of those events you're going to sell 100 copies as a small press indie guy, because, you know, you might get 100 people walk past, but not everyone's going to stop and take the time to look at what you've got. And I mean, anytime someone chooses to you know, to buy something that we've created, I do feel very, very honoured, you know, with everything that's been going on over the last few months. You know, so I feel very, very honoured, very privileged that people, you know, believe in the story enough and enjoy it enough to want to consume it.
Do you think that now you have that audience? Has it added any extra pressure to you, like in terms of the expectation of, wow, I've really got to make the next one great as such?
Yeah, I mean, issues like issues wise, like 5 and 6, I've already written them, and I'd say I'm like 80 to 90% happy with each of those. So I might go through and fine tune them a little bit. And generally, our process is I'll write the issue, I'll give it to Ben, he'll, you know, do some pencils and some inks, and then we'll go back and maybe talk over it. And, you know, creative process wise, you know, we just try and focus on telling the story, because obviously I know what's going to happen, where it's going to go. Delivering everything, definitely. Like when it ended on Friday, I don't, literally the last week, I feel like I've just been, almost feel like I've been hit by a truck. Just mentally, I've been exhausted by it, because the Kickstarter ran for 35 days, and every day, you know, you're on it from the moment you wake up. Even though, you know, obviously I work as well, like, that you're on it like full time. Like you're on your Facebook, you're on the Instagram, you're going on the page. You know, you're trying to think of anything and everything you can do in order to, you know, hopefully get in front of people. Literally the last week I think it's like that, just like a huge adrenaline dump, you know, just like, wow, like we've done it. And now it's just like, okay, we've still got to fulfill everything, obviously, which is, you know, its own massive task. And, you know, absolutely, like, there's a lot of responsibility on us to make sure we get that done. You know, this is our second Kickstarter, so I've got no issues with getting all that done. It's just, it just takes its toll, you know. It takes its toll.
And what's the something I don't know how long it particularly takes to turn it around. So from a writing perspective, and then getting it onto Ben to do the drawings. What's sort of time frame for an issue?
It depends. I mean, if you think of each page has to go through quite a few processes. So Ben would first of all, and you know, obviously, unfortunately, he's not here to correct me should I get any of this wrong. But he would normally draw freehand on like an A3 piece of paper. So that would be his pencils. So he goes over first of all on a pencil, and then he goes on after that with an ink. He would then scan that in. He then colours it digitally, and he also does lettering digitally. I mean, they're normally 4 different jobs. Like if you was at Marvel or DC, you have one person does the pencils, another person does the inks, another person does the colouring, another person does the lettering. Plus, you then obviously, of course, got the writer as well. I mean, I would probably hazard a guess that each page probably ends up equating to, I don't know, somewhere in the region of 6 to 8 hours. One of the toughest things is actually lettering. As crazy as it seems, because it's just like little balloons, getting those right and getting those correct, the way the text is, like the actual dialogue is fitted in. There's a huge art to it all.
Just to make it readable, I take it, so that it looks like it's flowing.
Yeah, essentially, because ideally with a comic panel, your eye should always be drawn from left to right. So as you go through reading it, so ideally, if person one is speaking, you want them to be on the left side of the panel. There's lots of, you know, there's lots of rules and stuff when it comes to comic book making. I mean, you don't obviously have to stick to them. You probably should stick to a lot of them, but you don't. You know, you can do your own thing at the same time, and that's probably one of the joys actually of you know, being a small press indie guy. When we first started making the comic, we were like, okay, well, we have to have X amount of pages per comic because that's like industry standard. But it's like, well, we're our own thing, so we don't have to do that. If we need an extra page or two, we can do that. That's up to us. You know, it's our choice. So at least that way, because obviously, ideally, we always want to end with that little bit of a cliffhanger. So you're like, what happens next? Yeah,
definitely. Well, with any comic book series or that can go into a TV show or a movie, which hopefully the Secret Protectors maybe one day. If you just a quick question on that, if you were Ben, who's the lead character, you could argue, who would be the guy you would want to play him?
I mean, if I could just say, I would prefer a TV series than a film series.
Why did you say that though? What? That's an interesting comment. What would be
storytelling? I think I just feel like you can tell a more in detail story, a more in-depth story, especially when it comes to developing characters. I mean, with the Secret Protectors, because it's an ensemble, you know, it's an ensemble team sort of thing. A bit like, I mean, you guys spoke about it just recently. You were talking about, obviously, you know, the Snyder cut of Justice League, and you know how they tried to do what Marvel were doing off the bat without doing the necessary legwork of having the Iron Man film, having the Thor film, having the Cap film, and then also, you know, in Iron Man 2, Black Widow turns up. In Thor 1, you've got Hawkeye for a few minutes. You know, you'd already seen Nick Fury, so
you're laying the groundwork.
Yeah, so in order for it to be a film, I mean, even like an animated series, I think would be a better landing platform for it potentially than a film series, because where I'm not sure where, you know, if you're looking at like a 3-act narrative, I'm not entirely sure in my own mind where the beginning, middle, and end would be when it comes to our story. Whereas obviously, if it's a TV show, you can have those begin, middle, and ends of each issue. I mean, for it to be a film, I think my point being is that it would have to be vastly different to what it currently is.
Yeah, too much compromise, I'm guessing.
Yeah, potentially. I mean, as for who would play Ben, to be honest, I would actually like an unknown to play Ben. I'd like someone who's never, you know, not necessarily never worked before, but you know,
Joe blogs off the street.
But no, someone who, you know, the audience potentially doesn't have any preconceived ideas about, you know, just someone, you know.
I like that.
Yeah.
And I often find with a lot of shows that I enjoy the most, they're the ones where you're not familiar with a lot of the characters. I mean, one for example, which leads into me talking about my one of my favourite villains was in Daredevil, the series, which was on Netflix, and Wilson Fisk or Kingpin. I mean, for me, I really struggled with this when we came up with the idea of talking about our favourite heroes and villains. I mean, there's so many options, really. I mean, one I mentioned to you, Matt, off air was Jim Carrey's Riddler in Batman. I thought he was hilarious. I thought he was brilliant. But if we're going to talk
really
about
the character,
but if we talk about actual villains in that sort of scenario of superheroes. Wilson Fisk was pure evil, and there was that kind of gangster mob sort of image that he held, but he also had that kind of, I don't know, that what I loved about it in the Daredevil series, the guy who played him, Adam, you probably know his name, Vincent
D'Onofrio.
That's it, Vincent D'Onofrio. Like, one, he was a brilliant actor. I've never seen him in anything before. I know he's been in other stuff.
Been in loads.
But for me, it was he had that soft side as well when he especially when he was around Vanessa, who I can't remember whether he actually marries her or not, but you had that. What I liked about it in Daredevil, and I think this relates back to what you were saying about a TV series, is that they even I'm sure they done like a whole episode which was just on him and painting the picture of him rather than it just being, here's your bad guy, he's going to go kill a load of people or beat up a load of people. But that's what I liked about that. But you had that two different sides of him, which I really liked. And then obviously he came back, I think, in the third series of that and was like even more evil. And, you know, some of the scenes where, I mean, I'm sure there was one where he was like, it was almost like Snatch or Lockstock. I can't remember which one, where he's slamming someone's head inside the door of a car. Like, it was grim, but amazing for mine.
Do you remember that I saw on the TV the other day, and they're repeating a series called Heroes? I can't remember what channel it was on, but again, I think that justifies your choice as well in terms of, you know, there's so many different characters on there. It plays to what James was saying. A lot of those, you know, probably actors that you'd never seen before, and it was like that blank canvas that you were starting again, learning the sort of characters almost as the characters were learning it, as they were sort of finding their superpowers and things like that. And I thought that was very good at his time. I think he drifted off a bit sort of in the third series, but that was fantastic.
Yeah, I used to really love Heroes back in the day. I mean, like you said, it did definitely trail off, unfortunately. I mean, that was during the writer's strike time, wasn't it? So
wasn't it?
Yeah, there's a lot of shows, as we all know, that just, you know, really struggled throughout that period. But I mean, but going back to what you're saying, James, about Vincent D'Onofrio's portrayal of Kingpin, he brought a real vulnerability to it that potentially in a film you might not. Well, you just probably, you know, a film being, you know, a page of your script normally equates to 1 minute of screen time. So with a film, you know, if it's 2 hours, you know, you're looking at like 120 pages. If you've got a series and, you know, you've got an hour-long slot each week, you know, you add that up over, you know, 10 episodes or so, you've got so much more time to be able to invest in these characters.
Yeah, definitely.
You know, with Fisk, I mean, one of the things that was, I mean, I don't want to go into too many spoilers in that, but they really tried to humanize him. And even with his, like, you know, his evilness, it was, you know, he thought he was doing a good thing, a bit like Thanos, really. I mean, obviously a much smaller, you know, less world-threatening, yet less universe-threatening version. But he thought that what he was doing was the good thing, and he was willing to get his hands dirty to do it.
Definitely. Who would your favourite villain be, Matt?
Favourite villain? Mine's a fairly conventional choice. Would be the Joker.
Heath Ledger one, or just the Joker as a character as a whole?
Joker as a character. The reason I pick him was, and I've spoken about it a couple of times, I think, on the show, is sort of my turning point into a lot of superhero related things was the Tim Burton Batman, and sort of Jack Nicholson's Joker at the time I thought was amazing. I like the Joker's character because he's just a normal person. He's a normal person that's just come across whatever's happened, and the thing I like as well. So I'm going to ramble a bit with this, but the Heath Ledger Joker, it was very mixed up where he actually came from, and he kept telling these different stories as to what had happened to his face and these sort of things. There was that mystery, and then even in the newer Joker, there's you've seen this horrible sort of evolution into it, but he's a real person who's had a terrible time for whatever reason it's been, and a bit like you said, but the other character thinking he's doing something right in a way. There's that sort of he's creating this new life for himself at the detriment of everyone else, but he's sort of reborn into this character. And it's relatable is the wrong word for the Joker, but it's sort of it's just down to earth sort of. I don't in terms of superheroes and things like that, I'm sometimes turned off by the huge fantasy sort of element to a lot of them. So yeah, that would be mine for that reason.
Do you think with the Joker as well? Again, there's an element. I mean, you and I went to see the Joker movie, the recent one, and there were times in that again where you felt sorry for him and you had that compassion for him. Whereas, but at the same time, he could spin it on its head and then flip out and kill people.
Yeah, exactly that. He's a relatable person. You can sort of empathise in certain aspects.
Yeah,
with him, but then it will be that pure mania that will come out, and you'll think, well, God, he's he's not a traditional. He's not super for any reason, really, apart from his own evil and
Do you think that's one of the difficulties in picking? Trying to narrow it down to just any one character, because you've got, I mean, as you just described there, even with the Joker, of course, Joker is a huge character, recognised the world round. He's a pop culture icon, isn't he? But you think of all the different iterations of just that character, like just in comics for a start, because I don't know if you're aware, there's a comic. It's been pushed back a few times. I don't know when it's coming out or if it's come out recently, and I haven't heard. But called Three Jokers, and the idea is that there's actually been three Jokers all along. And obviously, as you were just saying, we've had Nicholson play it, we've had Ledger play it, and now recently, more recently Leto and Phoenix. And they've all been very, very different iterations of that one character. So I feel like you almost have to pick a certain iteration of whatever character it may be.
We don't talk about Leto, okay?
I've never seen him as Joker. I did watch Suicide Squad. Again,
respect to the Joker.
That just didn't appeal, that whole film. But yeah, I think for me, when I was young watching Jack Nicholson as Joker, it was he's very loud and the purple and all that stuff. He was closer to the original sort of Batman TV series, wasn't he? But the the one that really struck a chord was the Heath Ledger one. Just that intensity behind him, that the unpredictability and the thing with a pencil. Let me show you a trick and sort of wax the guy's head into it, and that is. It's just incredible. But you're in awe of that character, even though you're slightly terrified by him.
But I think the Dark Knight series brought in a new wave, I think, for superhero movies, with regards to it being a little bit edgier and a little bit darker. No pun intended on the title of them, but it kind of probably reached an older audience, I think. Whereas I remember growing up watching the Batman movies then, and I can't remember them being as dark. I mentioned earlier about Jim Carrey as the Riddler, or you had Arnold Schwarzenegger as Mr. Freeze or whatever he was. So the only one I can think of that was probably that sort of time would have been like Penguin when God, who played Penguin? That was
Danny
Danny
DeVito,
DeVito, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And he was dark. I remember that being pretty creepy as a kid watching that, or a younger version of myself.
Yeah,
But it was still, I guess, with. Sorry, mate. Go on.
I was just going to say, like the Dark Knight trilogy. I mean, I just love Christopher Nolan. Like, if there's someone I could sit down with and just have a conversation with. I mean, even him or his brother, to be honest, because they both, everything they do is just incredible. They take, you know, they always tell stories in different ways that you've probably not experienced before. You know, I'm really looking forward to seeing Tenet or Tenet, however you meant to pronounce it. But yeah, I mean, the Dark Knight trilogy, as you were saying, it's more adult in the way it's set, but it's also at the same time not overly gruesome, or, you know, there's very little used in the way of sort of shock value, so to speak.
Yeah.
And you can totally understand why Bruce goes down the path he goes down, which, you know, a lot before then, I don't think the films had done a particularly good job of making you like Bruce Wayne, because you know, comic book films were just, you know, they were kind of throwaway, really. They weren't really proper films. Don't be wrong, I love them all. But
that's what I think the difference with the Christopher Nolan ones is, that he set out to make a really good film. It didn't matter what the subject matter was; he was making a really good film, and it was almost sort of incidental that it was fit into the genre of superhero movie. It was in a world you could relate to. It was in a, you know, an environment that everyone could understand. It just so happened that one guy was a billionaire and the other one was a crazy. You know, that's it. They were just characters in it. It wasn't, oh, let's make a superhero movie. Let's, you know, everything's gonna be crazy in it. It was just a real film.
It was also very much like, you know, an ideological sort of struggle between those characters. It wasn't necessarily just them having a showdown and a 15-minute like CGI fight, you know. It's funny because as soon as, if you look at like the third one, Dark Knight Rises, a lot of people either don't like that one, or, you know, it's their least favourite, but it's actually the one that's probably the most like an actual superhero film. Out of the three, like, if you know, the first one, you know, being the origin, the second one being, you know, just a bit of a crime film, really. And then the third one is kind of more of a superhero sort of themed film. What of him, you know, having his back broken and then having to climb out of the pit, and, you know, it was
incredible guy.
But you know, it was him. I think Nolan sort of cracking, or trying to crack, really, the fact that, you know, if there was any criticism that people had of his films, I mean, I think unjustly, it was that, you know, it didn't feel like a superhero film. And I feel like the third one was him sort of trying to go a bit more that route. But yeah, I mean, they're just great films. They're probably three of my favourite films, all of them. They're just brilliant.
Who would be your favourite villain, Ad?
Now that you've opened it up to not just comic books, I can name my favourite hero and villain with one person.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm gonna go with, and I don't think either of you watched it. Tony Soprano from The Sopranos, obviously. If you've not watched it, I mean, he is just, James Gandolfini is just, I mean, you know, obviously passed away quite a few years ago now, but he in that series is just phenomenal. He can make you laugh, cry, hate him, love him. He can do all these things, sometimes in one scene. He is just incredible. As what you were saying about D'Onofrio, for instance, as Kingpin, obviously very different TV shows, but you follow, obviously, The Sopranos, being that it's about them, and their mob life. And Tony is probably one of the, I would say, probably the best written TV character ever, because he feels like a real person. And real people aren't really just good or bad, for the most part. I mean, I think most of us try to be, you know, our best version of ourselves on any given day, but you know, we all make mistakes, and we all unfortunately upset people at some point in our lives, whether we mean to or not. But I can't say enough good things about Sopranos. I'm literally rewatching it again at the moment for like the third time. He's like, I feel like I've watched all the other good TV shows out there, so I'm just going back to Sopranos. Anytime I run out of good TV shows, I just go back to Sopranos.
It's on the list for me. It's one that I've always wanted to watch. I've watched bits and pieces of it, but again, I think we said about this before. It falls into that trap of thinking, God, that's an investment in time. Like, and when they're about an hour a piece, aren't they? For how many seasons?
There's 6.5 seasons, and there's about 10. I think there's maybe 12 episodes per season. Yeah. But
it's doable.
Yeah, there you go. 60 hours, 3 days straight. I can do this.
It's such a great series. Honestly, it really is. I think it's 86 hours in length in total. But it's worth investment. But
what would you say?
Watching long form series and stories, that's like my thing. I love watching. Neither of you watch Game of Thrones, is that right?
No, I can't stand it.
No.
Yeah. So I mean, like by means, like you could watch the first 3 seasons of that when it was good, and then just don't watch anything afterwards. Whereas Sopranos, for instance, is amazing from the very first episode, even though it's like the pilot, to the end. Like it's always phenomenal. It's always kicking you, basically. You just can't. But I mean, I love lots of different series like that. You've got The Wire, The Deuce is really good as well. They're both from David Simon. He also did Show Me a Hero as well, which is only a 6-part one. That was phenomenal. Really, really well acted. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I wouldn't even say, I mean, superheroes are my thing. They really are. But when it comes to just digesting storytelling, these sort of shows for me are just like incredible. They really are. They really hit you, you know.
Having picked Tony Soprano, what would you say what would make him a hero? Like, just put you on the spot. What would make him a hero, and what would make him a villain? Like, if you could pick 2 things out of the series, 2 standout things for you.
Ooh. Well, story-wise, obviously he's the lead man, you know, so he is the hero of the story, regardless of how he's portrayed a lot of the time. He likens himself to a soldier because people in that life are soldiers, and they all sign up to that life knowing the repercussions of what could take place if you fall out of line, if you do something wrong. So, you know, story-wise, he is written as the hero, a bit like Walter White is in Breaking Bad, for instance. But Tony also, at the same time, you know, he's a horrible person. He kills people. He has people killed. You know, he you know, if someone, I'm just watching season 2 at the moment, and there's a guy. I'm sure have you both seen Terminator 2?
Yeah.
So do you remember Robert Patrick, T1000? He's in a few episodes, and he's a guy who's got a huge gambling vice, and Tony floats him money that he knows he hasn't got, and then literally sucks his business dry. And he's a horrible person, Tony Soprano. Like, if you're on the wrong side, if you're on his business side, it's not a good place to be. But if you're, you know, a friend or a loved one, a family member, etc., then, you know, you'd love to have Uncle Tony on your side. You know, you really would. You would. But yeah, you know, he's just the way he's written. He's one of those characters that when you could imagine him being a real person. It's not so over the top ridiculous, and it's not so, you know, dull and mundane. Like it strikes the perfect balance. So for me, like if we're opening it up further afield to any sort of form of media, so to speak, then I would have to go with Tony Soprano.
Cool. James?
For hero, mine, I went a bit left field with this because I was still going. Well, I mean, let's not go down that road. We're not going there. There's a whole program about him. No, I picked what I consider to superhero is probably the wrong way, but I picked Scott Pilgrim because mainly because I watched this again recently and hadn't seen it for years. And it's an awesome film. You know, it's not one that you've really got to concentrate on necessarily, but the concept of it, the design, the effects that they have in it. The concept is that he's meets this girl, falls in love with her, and then has to beat her 7 ex-boyfriends to win her love, basically, or woo her. But it's almost computer game-esque as well. There's a kind of retro gaming with, and not just that, the soundtrack in the film, I'm pretty sure, was a good one. Off the top of my head, that seems to ring a bell. But I just thought it was a really fun. And again, there's so many variations of superheroes, Spider-Man, Batman, Superman, that you could, the obvious ones that you could pick.
You know that, right?
Scott Pilgrim.
I was about to say, I'm sure it did.
I didn't know that. No, didn't know that.
Yeah, it was a graphic novel. I'm sure. I don't think it's. I don't know if it was. I can't remember now off the top of my head if it was told issue by issue or if they just sort of released it in one go. But yeah, it was a comic to begin with.
But even like who they cast for, I can't remember his name. Who was the lead? Was it John Cena? I think his name is it?
Yeah, John Cena. Yeah.
Like
John Cena.
Not John Cena. We don't talk. Another name we don't mention on the show. John Cena.
What a different film that would have been.
Yeah, very different. A young John Cena that would have been as well.
Just juice to the gills, yeah.
Yeah, so he wouldn't have had to beat any 7. They would have been all over him as well. But he was like a geeky, nerdy sort of frail character, and then he's trying to go through all these kind of different.
Is it Michael Cera?
Maybe it is, yeah. Maybe
Michael
it is.
Cera, yeah. It's not John Cera, yeah.
Not John Cena. Not John Cena's cousin. Yeah, Michael Cera. Yeah. Whatever. That guy.
That fella in the
Scott
film.
Pilgrim. Yeah, he was awesome. That would be mine. What's yours, Matt?
Well, my two are really boring and standard. I wouldn't. Compared to the left field, we've got Batman to match Joker. I absolutely love him. Again, for pretty much the same reasons. It's the whole origin of Batman, of him being, a guy who's lost his parents or lost his dad, and sort of having gone through that traumatic event. And, on the outside, it looks like he's lives a life of privilege and should be okay, but sort of inside he isn't. And it's that sort of that sort of relatable story. But he again, similar to what I said about Joker, he creates a new him via Batman, and uses the wealth he has. He doesn't have any superpowers as such, but he creates Batman through his wealth and so on. And well, in a way, he does create Batman through his wealth, but also it takes him back to sort of the real world a little bit in terms of being out on the streets and sort of mingling with the low life and so on. It keeps his finger on the pulse from that point of view as well.
But did I know you're a big fan of Batman regardless, but the stuff that you're talking about there, see, I only relate that to the Christopher Nolan films, the whole kind of the flip side, the Bruce Wayne story, rather than it just being, I don't remember too many of the older versions of the Batman films where they dived or delved into that side of it as much.
No, they didn't really.
In the Tim Burton one, they do, and they sort of allude to the fact that it could have been Joker that killed his parents.
Yeah.
And because at the end, it's the if you ever dance with the devil in the pale moonlight, is the phrase that the person who killed his parents, and also Joker used it later on. But yeah, I just think from that point of view, he's a very human character, apart from the fact he's got all these toys and stuff.
Yeah. Was your favourite version of him played by Del Boy?
Del Boy. Without doubt, yeah. I don't think I've got a favourite one, Again, it's similar to, I think a lot of them have worked. Some of them haven't worked. I mean, the Tim Nolan, Christopher Nolan. Tim Nolan. Why am I saying Tim Nolan? It's Tim Nolan.
That's the love child of Tim Burton and Christopher Nolan.
Christopher Nolan, yes. Christopher Nolan, Batman was great. I think, there's no particular...
Ben Affleck.
Ben Affleck, I avoided like the plague, if I'm honest. Just 'cause I didn't like the idea of it.
His
No
Batman
other
was-
reason than that. Just didn't like the
his
idea of
Batman
it being
wasn't
Batman.
too bad.
Yeah.
His Batman was all right. Unfortunately, I mean, this is the trouble. You go from, Batman Begins, where you've got all that time to tell the story about Bruce Wayne, and why he's troubled, why he makes these choices in the past, and that affect his present, and why he ends up as Batman, to Ben Affleck, literally versing Superman straight away. And it's very, very difficult to get particularly invested in these characters. And I think one of the key sort of things for me that really makes you want to get behind whatever character it may be is that they, that tragedy befalls them, be it of their own making or just through, sheer bad luck. And, they get themselves back up and, try and be better for it, regardless of where life then takes them. That for me is the thing that absolutely needs to happen for, and for the most part it does. Tony Stark in the first Iron Man film, thinks he's got the world at his feet until he gets blown up and then he's in a cave for like X amount of months, picking shrapnel out of his chest. And then you've got Thor, who, he's cast down from Asgard and, he's all his powers taken away from him, has to learn humility. And Cap as well, Cap is literally the most humble guy you're ever going to meet. It's given the powers that he gets given because, Erskine believes that he'll know how to use them and when to use them, when not to use them. Otherwise, the sort of the flip side to that is the villains. They're the ones who don't learn those lessons.
Well, that's another episode. Thank you very much, Adam, for joining us for the chat today.
Thank you for having me.
It's been an absolute pleasure. If you can let everyone know when they can find the Secret Protectors and show their support.
You can find us on Instagram, Facebook, both if you just type in the Secret Protectors. We have got a very low-key Indiegogo campaign we're going to launch sometime soon because we've been getting a few messages following the Kickstarter from people saying, can I still get a copy, etc. So we thought we'd just do like a low-key Indiegogo thing afterwards, just as like a bit of a second chance thing, basically.
Fantastic. And we'll certainly share that on our thing when you
definitely
when you put that
Cheers,
out.
guys.
Yeah, and you can also find us on Instagram and Facebook and Twitter at This Week in Metropolis. Go over there, give us a follow, and you'll be able to keep up to date with all of our latest episodes and posts in between. Until next week,
goodbye.
We'll speak to you again then.
Thank you for listening. Transmission over.